we're going to start things off. I am pleased to welcome Todd Richheimer. He is the CEO and co-founder of Lofty, a data-powered, justice-driven law firm. It strives to ensure the best outcomes and experiences for personal injury clients. Todd was a litigator and a business analyst prior to starting Lofty and is a WashU Law alum. Just last evening, Todd was honored as the very first recipient of the Legal Technology Award for his contribution to the advancement of legal technology in his education and practice from WashU Law. Todd was the first person Dean Lindquist reached out to when she started investigating the world of legal tech, and we are thankful to him for his insight and perspective. Please join us in welcoming Todd Richheimer. I guess we'll start with the very first softball question. What inspired you to get into the world of legal tech?
I like softball questions. Thanks for having me. I graduated here in 2008, and this place has played a huge role in my career. So legal tech, it really started, I didn't know I wanted to go into legal tech when I graduated law school. It was more, I started my first job. I started on the corporate defense side of things in litigation, and I was amazed by the level of inefficiency. I mean, law firms, this is 2008, were stuck, 2 generations behind the rest of the world in terms of how things operated. And so it was really just a gravitation towards all of the inefficiencies that led me to be interested in legal tech. And more specifically, I'll never forget this. I was trying to schedule a deposition, and it involved probably 15 parties, and it took forever. And the way that it all started was I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this, and called who's now my co-founder, who is a tech guy, and said, there's got to be a way to create an app that's way easier to book depositions. And that's what led the sort of evolution of Lofty.
So you spoke a little bit about some of the challenges you saw in the legal industry that inspired you to found Lofty. Can you talk about what you think some of the biggest challenges in that the legal tech industry faces today?
Yeah, so I don't know. I think the challenges are more for the law firms, right? And then how technology is layered on top of them. You have this old industry that's been around forever, right? And I see Peter Joyce sitting over there. Peter and I talk about ethics all the time, right? Is our ethics rules have prohibited non-lawyers from owning law firms. And so there hasn't been a lot of tech development in legal, right? Because if you think about the way that technology is created, it's created by some sort of capital source coming in, a venture capitalist, if you will, right? Funding technology, and then getting upside or profit when that technology works. Given our regulatory landscape, there has not been a lot of technology development up till today. And for a variety of reasons, largely regulatory change, you're seeing a huge uptick in legal technology getting created. And so now there's this race for law firms to adopt different technologies and rethink the way that they're operating.
Interesting. Could we dig into that just a little bit? I'm curious because I was thinking about regulatory landscapes with a few friends. Specifically, I have a friend who's in private equity and was thinking, oh, why couldn't we just buy a law firm? It's like, well, there are rules against that. Yeah. And what's precipitating this change in regulation?
Yeah, so I think what's precipitated it is that we have a huge access to justice problem in this country. Right? I mean, you hear stats all the time. Something like 85% of people that need legal services can't afford them, right? And if you think about why they can't afford them, is because the cost of goods sold, the services of lawyers, has continued to increase in price. And it's continued to increase in price because as law firms, we don't have efficient businesses. And the way that you create efficiency is with technology. And so I think there's a prevailing line of thought that if you add technology to legal, right? If you give lawyers a more efficient way to practice, then they could theoretically lower their price of services, right? And more people could afford it. And so with that, you take the state of Arizona, they recently changed their rules. I think it's 3 years old now, to allow non-lawyers to own law firms, right? Which now allows outsiders to come in and more robustly, I'll say, innovate in this space. And you're seeing a variety, and so that sort of like opened up the floodgates for innovation, and it's by no means a settled area. It's going to be super interesting to see what happens between all of the different states and what they ultimately end up doing with the rules.
So with these changing rules and regulations, do you think we'll see a growth in tech entrepreneurship in the legal space? And if so, what kind of problems, and you talked about things like access to justice, what kind of problems in this space do you think you see solutions to?
Oh, I do. I think you're going to see, we were just talking about this actually. In my opinion, and every student should be thinking about this, is legal tech is the next big thing. I'm certain of it. And I'm certain of it for a variety of reasons. One, the legal space is absolutely enormous, right? Two, with this regulatory shift, you're seeing Wall Street wake up to that opportunity. And so in a lot of ways, the cat is out of the bag, and there's this race now to innovate. And yeah, I mean, I think the opportunities are limitless, right? In terms of, and it goes by all the different practice areas, the ways you can help people. I mean, I was talking to a classmate of mine, is a judge now. And I was talking to him this week, and we were talking about the fact that there's really a huge justice gap, right? In terms of if you're somebody who gets sued, right, and you get sued for, call it less than $50,000, right? You have a real problem, right? And that problem is by, do I pay what I'm being sued for, or do I hire a lawyer, which is probably going to cost me just as much to get out of the mess? Right? And so you could imagine, here's one example of where technology is going to help, right? Imagine a world where, the small claims limits are increased, right? And so now an individual could represent themselves pro se more effectively. And they have technology by their side to help them navigate these things and make arguments that fit within the law. And so that's just one example, but you see it across practice areas. Debt collection, landlord-tenant, family law, criminal law, right? On and on and on. There's loads of inefficiencies, both in ways that the individual can help themselves and in law firms being able to operate more efficiently.
It seems like, specifically in the case that you were bringing up, a lot of that's with the ability to increase pro se representation, which is certainly a valuable thing. And I was attending a talk earlier this past week with Judge Deal and Professor Oliver Roberts. Certainly AI is helping people with that. And I'm sure there's going to be many inefficiencies to target, like you said. But as an outsider, it seems, very limited so far. And it seems like it's going to take a while for things to really successfully implement, even purely beyond how effective the tech is. What do you think are the biggest challenges in light of that for the legal tech industry at large?
I think there's loads of challenges, starting with our ethics rules, right? I mean, because I don't necessarily think that tech solutions are going to be all or nothing, right? Where it's pro se or not pro se, representation or not representation. I think there's going to be hybrid type models popping up. And we really need to think about how those work in conjunction with each other. I mean, here's an example. You go online, right? If you go onto Reddit as an example, right? And you ask somebody for an opinion as to, I'm representing myself pro se, what should I do in this situation? 99.9% of the lawyers out there respond with, I'm sorry, that's asking for legal advice, I can't help you, right? And so we've created this world where lawyers are afraid to give answers. The individual needs those answers. And I think there's a way that technology can help bridge that gap. But as an industry, we need to rethink sort of our rules and how you do that in a manner where the lawyer doesn't feel like they're putting themselves out there in a way that could harm them.
So you were a practicing attorney for several years before starting into tech entrepreneurship. Are there ways that that experience has sort of informed your career as a tech entrepreneur? And are there also ways that you wish like law school or practicing law had better prepared you for tech entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so still a practicing lawyer, just in a different way, if you will. And that's the crux, right? That's what I would love to see is like, let's broaden the definition of what it means to practice law, right? I remember coming to law school, and I think a little bit about my background is relevant, is I spent 3 years in finance before going to law school. Then came to law school, practiced 6.5 in traditional litigation roles. But I do remember coming to law school, and like, there were pretty much two paths, right? There was, hey, especially at a really, really good school like WashU, those paths in a lot of ways are, hey, I'm gonna go work for three paths, right? I can remember my classmates. There were those that wanted to go work for a big firm. There were those that wanted clerkships, right? And there were those that wanted to go into academia. I do think we'd be well served as both a law school and as a legal community to add, and I don't know what you call it, but whether it's legal technology or how you better the practice of law, right, to those things. Because at the end of the day, it is the business of law, right? Any which way you cut it, right, business plays into it. And I do think that law school students are left, by and large, around the country, right, without any business know-how when they graduate law school. And that's just gonna get amplified with the advent or with the increase in technology in the space.
That certainly makes a lot of sense. We're only 1L, so we can't say comprehensively, oh yeah, we didn't learn that much about business in law school. We took a negotiations course, but that's only a very small aspect of business. And I think both of us, if we care about tech, certainly have some inclination to be agreeing with you on this.
Well, and I'll say, sorry to cut you off, is that's what got me so excited to come here for this event. Like, I love the emphasis that WashU is putting on legal technology, right? And so, like, as a 1L, you're being exposed to these things now, which is only gonna make you more prepared when you enter the work world.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So for the average student or any average attorney in, like, say, traditional legal practice, where is legal technology coming in now? And I guess, what do you think would be the first next step that traditional law would implement?
Yeah, so I think you're gonna see law firms are in a race to operate more efficiently, right? And I think that the low level of that is taking tasks that are very process-driven and layering in AI to do those things, right? So there are a series of tasks from the intake of a new client, right, through the initial workup of that file that are very process-driven, right, that are gonna be ripe for AI. And I think as law school students and, what the world's gonna look like tomorrow, I do think that needs to be taken into account, right, is like what jobs are going to be available, right, and how do you get the requisite experience to thrive in tomorrow's landscape. And I think that involves significant thought. I think tomorrow's lawyers are going to look different than today's, right? And there's an example, and you see it pop up in the news all the time, is using AI for legal research and writing, right? I think that presents a whole host of issues, right? As a lawyer, you need to learn how to critically think and prepare whatever it is you're preparing, whatever brief it is, right? And make sure that the citations you're using are good, right? And so it's how do you use AI to be additive and not a shortcut that leads to, the bad practice of law.
You spoke about how WashU has put all this emphasis on preparing students for like this sort of new world of legal practice where AI and technology are such a big part. Do you think there are ways in which law schools in general can be doing that better, or are there ways that like they currently sort of are missing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the right step, right? It's opening up these conversations and asking the hard questions and thinking about how do we navigate them, right? Here's a hard question. If low-level tasks are outsourced to AI, right? And theoretically, if there are less jobs because of that, how do we navigate that as an industry, right? To make sure that lawyers get the experience they need to then be able to represent people with the more sophisticated stuff, right? And so I think there's stuff like that. There's all sorts of questions. I was at a conference this summer, and one of the topics of conversation was the unauthorized practice of law, right? If somebody goes to ChatGPT and they ask it a legal question, and ChatGPT gives them advice on how to do that, is ChatGPT licensed to be giving that information, right? And so, like, I think that's just an example of, like, there's some really, really hard questions that need to be asked. And I do think academia and law schools can be really at the forefront of thinking through those issues and how to adapt. But it does, I'd be a liar if I didn't say this, it does worry me how slow the legal landscape is to adapt. And I think you have a couple forces really butting up against each other here. Is you have technology moving extraordinarily fast, right? And then you have regulators that move extraordinarily slow. You now have regulatory change and outside capital flooding into this marketplace that moves extraordinarily fast, and law firms that move extraordinarily slow, right? And so how you right the ship on those things, I think is hard.
Honestly, if you ask me, I think it's a point of perspective. If you look at law firms, like imagine law firms like 10 years ago compared to now, I think they would see what's happening and think we are moving extraordinarily quickly, which is perhaps even part of your concern, that this is fast for law firms, I think, right now, the way changes are happening. But yeah, in general, tech is always going to outpace industries, you know? I think that's just part of life. And yes, law is going to be more reticent to quickly get into that. So what ethical considerations do you think firms and lawyers more generally have to keep in mind as they are bringing it in? And how would firms be able to assess and integrate new legal technologies? Because there's starting to be a lot of competitors out there, and it's just a difficult space to navigate right now.
So I'll answer the ethics question in 1 second, but another thing that you want to think about with law firms, and as one else, you guys wouldn't have seen this yet, but I do think that there's like sort of like a foundation to how law firms work that make them particularly ill-prepared to handle this, right? Most of these law firms are partnerships, right? Which is effectively, let's agree by committee, which is really, really hard, right? When you have like lots of people with very strong voices that are very good at arguing, right? Trying to agree on this stuff. But the ethics considerations is like everything should start with what's best for the client. And it's like nails on a chalkboard for me when you have lawyers that are making $1,500 an hour claim that technology is terrible, right? And it's going to ruin the practice of law. How many people can afford $1,500 an hour, right? And I just think that technology gives us a way to make law more accessible to the public. So I think the analysis starts with what's best for the client, and then go from there.
You spoke about like ethical considerations with respect to using AI. Are the ethical considerations that lawyers have to take into account when using AI, are they different than the ethical considerations like lawyers had to deal with in the past, or is it sort of like a new kind of like problem for them?
I think just AI gives lawyers a shortcut, right? And I think by human nature, people are prone to take shortcuts. And I think that there's a famous Ronald Reagan quote that comes to mind: trust but verify, right? I think lawyers need to verify what it is they're relying upon. I think it would be incredibly foolish, and you're seeing these court cases pop up all the time, where such and such a lawyer submitted a brief to the court and AI hallucinated, right? It's like, as one else, I will tell you, blindly providing cites to a court where you haven't read those cases is a very, very bad idea. And so I think just as a blanket first step, right, that's a good place to start, is figuring out how do we enable our lawyers to use this awesome tool in a responsible manner.
I think that opens up a pretty clear question to me, but first I do want to clarify. Trust but verify is actually, it's a Ronald Reagan quote, but it's a Russian expression that he was simply translating for the American audience.
Yeah.
Just for the record.
Fair enough.
But
It's a good quote, though.
It was a good quote. My mother had said it once or twice at home, so that's why I know. But moving past that, what do you think future lawyers need most? Whether it's technical literacy, ethical reasoning, something else entirely. What skills do law firms need to implement into their attorneys so that they can do the right things and not get burdened by the shortcomings, the shortcut situation, and using the legal tech properly?
So lawyers are, by nature, risk averse. We need to put that to the side, right? I think that law firm leaders need to move fast and be okay with breaking things. And because nothing is going to be certain in this landscape. And now I will say, for law school students, you are sitting on a period of time ahead of you that is filled with an insane amount of opportunity. For those willing to think just a little bit differently, right, and willing to take just a little more risk than the prior generations have, I think there's an immense amount of opportunity. So I think it's largely a cultural shift, right? It's learning to adapt. If you look at pretty much across industries, any successful business out there, right, there's a willingness to try things that are not going to work, and then to double down and or double back, I should say, and try something new. And so I think that law firms would be well suited with a shift in mind frame, right, in trying new technologies and taking a little bit more risk.
So you've spoken about how law firms have sort of been slow to adapt, sort of like the changing landscape of tech, and how tech moves very quickly with respect to how quickly law firms move. Do you see the technology in our current moment as different than some of the sort of tech innovations that have changed legal practice over the course of your career? Or is this sort of just one more
Totally.
thing?
You guys are too young to remember this, but so when I graduated in 2008, the big debate at that time was, oh my God, they want us to put our information in the cloud, right? And there was this huge uproar over holy cow, we're entrusting client information onto these servers that are somewhere off in the distance, right? Now, hindsight being 2020, we could all look at the lunacy of that argument, that a server in somebody's broom closet is not safer than relying on Amazon, right, or whoever the server provider is. And so I just think it's examples like that, right, that we spent all this time on that particular issue, and that's just one of them. Then there was the transition from books to Westlaw and Lexis, right? That's another one that took place over time. And I just think that if, that debate as an example, right, if you think about the cloud-based movement compared to the speed at which these LLMs are advancing, it feels a lot faster to me. And I think that we need to adapt to that.
Well, we were not present for those debates, both like just as legal professionals, certainly not even thinking about it, but AI feels very different. I don't know if that's the best analogy, frankly, because like with the server situation, it's honestly, that was like a security protocol situation, whereas this is actually handing over agency to a degree to someone else, some other entity to do part of the practice of law. So I think it's a seismic difference, but
Oh, I agree with that. I think it's a seismic difference, and we seismically need to speed up the way in which we adapt, right? I use it as an example simply to say, like, we had this technology that popped up which was not all that groundbreaking, right? And we moved relatively slowly, whereas this is moving insanely fast with loads of other implications.
But we as legal professionals, you said that we have to put risk aversion to the side, which in theory I can kind of embrace that. But realistically, one, if all of us were not risk averse people, a lot of people wouldn't be going to law school. It's a very stable route that people with uncertain trajectories can turn to because it offers a very consistent path of employment and success in life for the people that want to do law that way. So I think that's asking a lot, frankly. Maybe it's the right thing to be asking, and maybe we do need people to push the envelope, as you were suggesting, but it is asking a lot.
Well, I don't think it's binary, right? I don't think, like, I think lawyers as a whole tend to think of things as right and wrong, black and white, yes or no, right? I think this is a spectrum. And all I'm advocating for is, like, right now we are on the left side of the spectrum of entirely risk averse. Let's take a couple steps to the right, right? Let's take a couple steps to the right and try new technologies and innovate on ways to help people that are otherwise not getting legal services.
To change the topic a little bit, we spoke a little bit about sort of WashU's emphasis on like legal technology and preparing us to practice in this sort of changing landscape. Do you have any advice you would give to law students in order to sort of best prepare themselves either for practicing law in like the sort of like new technology world that we live in, or even getting into legal entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I think legal entrepreneurship is not going to be for everybody, right? And so I think whatever your desired path is, whether it's big law, you know, the judiciary, academia, or legal tech, right, is to think hard about the way that technology is going to impact those verticals. Because and this is where I think risk-averse people can get themselves in a lot of trouble, is I think it is a bad assumption to assume that the practice of law yesterday is going to look like the practice of law tomorrow. And so I do think that like law school students should be thinking hard, and you guys are well equipped to do it, right? Because you're theoretically the most tech-enabled class to come through WashU, right? Just you're most up to date on today's technology. And so I think layering that into your education and thinking about the ways that that impacts the practice of law is just an important part of that evolution.
To get into the tech a little bit, I actually want to ask just more about what Lofty does, to contextualize like what we are doing and what a data-driven, data-powered, justice-driven law firm really is, and possibly speaking to how it affects the justice gap, because you alluded to that before.
Yeah. So what Lofty did was plotted out, and by the way, so we're in the personal injury space, right? Like, I don't think that there's a justice gap necessarily in personal injury, right? Personal injury attorneys, but this is what awakened me to it, right? Personal injury attorneys represent people on contingency, right? So somebody comes to a personal injury attorney, and it's really a beautiful thing. They don't have to come out of pocket to hire an attorney, right? An attorney will take a piece of what they're able to recover for that person. Now, I think as an industry, the personal injury side of things, that we can do things better, right? And we could do things better by paying attention to analytics to make sure people get the award that they deserve. And so what Lofty has done is when a personal injury case comes in, right, that case comes in on day one, and most cases will settle over a 5-year cycle, right? Some cases will settle in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, with the average being about 18 months to 2 years. And so there's very little attention in the industry today paid to a case that comes in and then ultimately what that's worth 5 years from now, right, to ensure that the client's getting maximum settlement value. And like any industry out there are good personal injury firms and there are bad personal injury firms, right? And there are personal injury firms that settle too quickly and personal injury firms that take too long. And so what we're after is using analytics to ensure that the client gets the representation that they deserve, right? And one of the things that's super interesting that have found in the evolution of Lofty, and we take this for granted as lawyers and especially at really good law schools, generally speaking, the public doesn't understand that there's a difference between lawyers, right? There's 1 million lawyers in the US and 300 million people, right? Most people don't know lawyers. And most of those people, and I know this because when I started Lofty, I was a walking, talking 24/7 call center for the first year and a half. Everybody called my cell phone. And people would call, and the original aha moment was, holy cow, like most of the public thinks that like a personal injury lawyer and a bankruptcy lawyer and a criminal lawyer and a family lawyer, they're all the same thing. Now, here's another area that we may want to think about improving as an industry, right? As an industry, our rules say we don't specialize, right? But as a practical matter, we do, right? You do not want your criminal lawyer handling your personal injury matter. And you don't want your personal injury lawyer handling your divorce matter, and on and on and on, right? And so our specific focus is on personal injury and using analytics to make sure that people that have been injured in an accident get the result that they deserve. But it has led to a broader interest in how you apply analytics and technology to the industry at large.
With respect to your career as the CEO of Lofty, were there challenges that you faced in building a tech company in the legal industry? I know you spoke earlier about like changing regulations, or even are there like traditions, like maybe like was it difficult to convince like lawyers to sort of embrace the idea of using big data in this way?
Yeah, so I actually think that this question highlights a piece of advice that I would give law school students, particularly those interested in the business side of law. It's one of the things that I've enjoyed most, but it's also been the most difficult, right? I now run a team that has all sorts of verticals, everything from, we have an engineering team, we have a data team, we have a marketing team, we have a product team, HR, and accounting, right? Learning to manage people outside of my core competency, which was law, was very hard. I got very lucky that I found a technical co-founder early on, right, who was able to teach me the tech side of things. But yeah, it's like paying attention to those different verticals and really expanding your area of knowledge beyond just law would be helpful, because I do think for the first time in history, right, these disciplines are merging, right? You have technology and law merging. You have how that technology gets funded merging. And so I think paying attention to those things would be really helpful.
We danced it around a lawyer, particularly because with Lofty, there's not much regarding the justice gap, but I do think that's something that has to be at the foremost consideration of law schools and possibly law firms as well. What do you think is underlying that gap, well, besides the cost? And what do you think legal technology can do to contributing access and addressing that gap?
Yeah, I think the justice gap is caused by people not being able to afford lawyers, right? And so technology can assist in two ways, in my opinion. And I do think that this applies to personal injury as well, what I'm about to say. I think that you're going to see more do-it-yourself models open up. And then you'll see more what I'm calling do-it-yourself plus models show up, right? Where the lawyer that once charged, I used $1,500 before, once charged $1,500, will say, I'll tell you what, I'll guide you for a lower dollar amount. Now, I don't think that $1,500 is the right example, right? I think that if you take, most attorneys are at smaller firms around the country, but let's say that you have, I don't know, I'll pick a number. Let's say your average small firm is charging somewhere between $300 and $400 an hour for representation, right? You can imagine a situation where you have a do-it-yourself plus model where it says, I'll tell you what, you're going to rely on this piece of technology to do it, and for $100 an hour, $150, right, half the price, I'll guide you on how to do that. I could see situations like that really benefiting the public. Because I do think that there is a big gap in where technology is today and just having somebody handle a matter pro se, right? But a lot of people are left in a gap, and there's not much you can do.
You spoke a little bit about how your co-founder brought sort of like a different perspective to sort of like Lofty. Like you had sort of a legal background and he had more of a tech background. Do you think there are other opportunities for like interdisciplinary work between legal professionals and tech professionals?
Oh, for sure. Like, and this is something that this is advice that I would give every law school student that ends up going to work for a firm, right? Is when you get there, think about the things that can be done better, right? Now, you have to handle that in a politically correct, diplomatic way, right? But like thinking about like what's inefficient and what could I do better with technology. And I think like making friends with folks in the engineering school, right, could really be helpful, right? And having to bounce those ideas off of what's possible and what's not.
For the law school perspective, since you've been working in this space for a while now, I think you have some insight into where tech could apply and where it could be implemented in curriculums early. So what do you think law schools should be doing? Like whether we need specific courses, extracurricular activities, kind of like our Tech and Privacy Law Society, certificates, etc. Like what can law schools be doing right now to prepare their students to take on this really large space the way you've painted it out for us?
I'll be a promo for WashU here.
Please.
It's this, right? It's this. It's having these conversations, right? And pulling in people with different perspectives. Perspectives, I will say, that have been very unpopular in this industry. Like really good for WashU for taking a leading position on this, because it's not popular. You're getting a lot of resistance out there. It's interesting. I see this all the time, and it's a shame. There's a lot of lawyers out there right now that are basically screaming, pounding the table, anti-legal tech, anti-regulatory change. And like, I think those are valid opinions, right? I don't take issue with the opinion. But I think putting your head in the sand and not coming to the conclusion that this is happening, whether or not you like it or not, is an incredibly bad mistake, right? This is happening. Whether or not lawyers like it or they don't like it, technology and regulatory change are coming to this space, and I think lawyers would be very, very well served to figure out how to adapt than to just complain about the change.
With regards to sort of like resistance to institutional change in the legal industry, like from the perspective of someone who's like just starting law school, I think we hear a lot about like the possibility that like sort of like junior associates will be replaced by AI.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see, and that could be one sort of like reason that people might have a resistance to this sort of new technology, is they don't want to lose their job to it. Mm-hmm. Do you see that as like sort of like a well-founded concern, or are they like sort of misunderstanding what's going on with legal tech?
I think it's a well-founded concern. I hate to say it, right? But let's separate that from, that's the concern, right? Now, what's the solution? Because, okay, so if there are less jobs for low-level associates, right? What we do know is that we ultimately need very capable, sophisticated attorneys, right, down the road, once they get past that gap. How do we fill that, right? And I think that there are solutions to it. We just need to rethink it. I mean, a conversation that came up last night, I had dinner with Peter Joy. My words, not his, so I don't want to put these in his mouth. But, you know, an example of this could be like, we have this huge justice gap in the country. I'm not saying this is the idea or a good idea or whatnot, but like an idea, we have this huge justice gap in this country. What if your third year of law school was dedicated towards helping all those people that can't afford legal services? That would certainly provide you with very real world experience, probably more experience than you'd get in your first year at a big firm, right? And so like, I think there's solutions to the reality that the role of a first year associate will change. We just need to think creatively about what those are.
I had a legal practice memo to write about the unauthorized practice of law, so that's just screaming at me when I hear this suggestion. But in principle, I think I agree that things have to change, and we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to instill some risk, presumably, in order to fill that gap. Because if we could fill it with certainty, there'd be no gap, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's just to your unauthorized practice of law comment, just to highlight on that, right? Like, think about the framework of the way that clinics are operated, right, at WashU, right? I'm not saying that you wouldn't have the oversight of a licensed attorney, right? Is you have a licensed attorney overseeing you, but you add an additional set of hands to help with these things.
Fair enough. It just came at me as an instinctual reaction. But one thing I'm thinking about is, what do you think, honestly, we're in this tenuous moment. Where do you, maybe it's two questions. Where do you hope we'll be in 5 to 10 years, and where do you think we'll be in 5 to 10 years as far as it concerns legal tech?
Yeah, so I definitely fall in the category of, I think what's going to happen in 5 years is overstated. I think what's going to happen in 10 years is anybody's guess, right? I think a 10-year horizon is a long time in technology. And I think that a lot can happen. And then I think that like there are, as I think about legal technology, and I'm most knowledgeable in the personal injury space, but I think this applies largely to all areas of law. There are giant infrastructure gaps that need to be filled for AI to recognize the promise that people think it has. And I'll give you one example, right? Federal court system is great with PACER and technological integrations into the federal court system. I know people are working on this, but the state court systems have not been technologically updated yet. Some systems are better than others, but there's no one place that I know of that you can go and submit documents electronically to the state court systems, right? It varies widely by states, et cetera. And so like that's a piece of infrastructure that is still developing that would allow AI to accomplish all of the things people claim AI can do, right? And so, I think that there's a lot of progress on a number of fronts that needs to happen for AI to have this huge impact that people think it will.
So in a way, like you're saying that there are like developments that need to be made like in the technology that like and those are sort of like limiting its adoption in the legal field in some ways. Like are there ways that you think like if AI was able to improve significantly in like the next decade or so, then like it would bring even more sort of like utility to the legal field?
Yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, I think it's almost like the way that I think about it is almost like the pipes that bring you water, right? So I'll give you one example from personal injury, which I'm most familiar with. Is there's a lot of talk that AI is going to replace all pre-litigation related work, right? So in personal injury, give or take 80% of the cases that hit a personal injury firm will settle before litigation is ever filed, right? So it's really a negotiation with the insurance company. And so there's a lot of talk of like, AI is going to replace pre-litigation work. Well, the issue with that is that there's infrastructure that is currently lacking that would allow that to happen. By way of example, right? In order to present your case to an insurance company, you need to collect medical records, right? Similar to the state court system, dealing with the hundreds of thousands of providers out there is very messy, right? There's no one way to do it. And so, and a lot of it's very manual. One person wants you to fax the request, the next person wants you to email the request, right? And so like integrating that with AI becomes quite a challenge. And so that's just one example, but I think that applies across practice areas where there's infrastructure that needs to still be built.
Beyond thinking about what's next and what struggles and possibly opportunities there are now, honestly, I want to look at the past just a little bit. Mm-hmm. Beyond your firm, there must be other companies, other people trying to break in and having success with implementing tech into law and paving that path forward, showing that there is a blueprint. Is there any other people, firms, et cetera, or maybe even something else within your own work that you want to highlight for showing that we can do this the right way?
Yeah. So first off, I would highly encourage law schools, and then more specifically the students, to think of this as an opportunity, right? Don't let the lawyers that want to put their head in the sand dissuade you or somehow create this impression that there's not a tremendous amount of opportunity for you, because there is. I think that being tech savvy actually equals the playing field for you in a lot of ways, right? Just by nature of where you are and what you come into law school already knowing. But yeah, I think the folks that I'm seeing succeeding across the board are the folks that are just being genuinely interested in technology, right? They're fiddling around with the LLMs, right? And trying to figure out how to create small efficiencies within their firms. And it's like there's countless ways to do it, right? I mean, just down to simple, take a repetitive task and make it non-repetitive, right? And you get more out of each one of your employees, right? Which then allows you to operate more efficiently. And so I think the firms that are doing that are really well positioned.
The way you describe sort of using these new technologies to improve legal practice, make it more efficient, sound like they sound like they'd be very reasonable to implement. But you also talk about people who are very resistant to this kind of change, maybe you described as having their head in the sand with regard to the changing legal landscape. Are there any particular reasons why you feel like people have so much resistance to this kind of change?
Yeah, I think that our rules as an industry have kept outsiders out, right? And in my opinion, and I think there's a lot of people that would disagree with this, but in my opinion, it's an overly protectionist viewpoint. We want to protect what's ours, right? We million lawyers are the few and the proud. It's our industry. Keep your hands off, right? I think that's where the mentality comes from. Now, that's not to discount by any stretch of the imagination the importance of making sure outsiders come in responsibly, right? And the client is always better off, right? And I think that those two arguments somehow get conflated, where people think that because somebody is for non-lawyer ownership, they are also for the degradation of legal services, right? I think both things can be true, right? And so that's where I fall on the issue. I think there's a lot of people that disagree, But I'll take it down to a practical matter, as well. I'll give you guys an example. So when I started my business, I met my co-founder, Mike. Mike is a computer science and electrical engineering double degree from MIT, right? Super bright guy. Started his career at Raytheon, developing satellite systems. Super bright guy. And we hit it off, right? And I'm like, you have these huge problems in legal, like let's apply technology to the space. Well, now I run into a problem, right? So at the time, I was only licensed in New York and New Jersey. And I was like, how do I incentivize this guy with this incredible talent and the skill set that I don't have to be my partner? And so I did my research, and every state, with the exception of the District of Columbia, prohibited non-lawyer ownership in law firms, right? Which makes it very hard to incentivize somebody to be your partner. Hey, I want you to be my partner, but you can't share in any of the upside, right? It doesn't work. And so what I did was I went and got licensed in DC, and we opened up shop in DC where he was permissibly allowed to own a piece of a law firm. But the reason why I raised that is because as the rate of technology increases, and still with the overwhelming majority of states not allowing non-lawyer ownership, how do you incentivize somebody with technological talent to partner with you? Right? And so that's the push and pull here, right? Is we need interdisciplinary help in order to adapt to the changing times. And so for me, that's where like non-lawyer ownership really comes in, right? Now I get people's concerns about big institutions, whether it be venture capital or private equity, infiltrating the space. I totally get that, right? But I do think that like these times call for interdisciplinary help, and that the best law firms of tomorrow will have technical talent on staff, all aimed at how do we get the client the best resolution or the best legal help they can.
I do want to quickly point out that if you were here, as a student, wanted to sign to the event, the QR code is up there. I also want to acknowledge that we've been asking you a lot of questions, and would be a time for like maybe audience questions. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, I'd like to open up the floor here. Otherwise, if anyone wants to, feel free to ask. I could say something. Go ahead. Yeah, it'd probably be better just so everyone can hear.
So we've talked a lot about AI in terms of generative AI and how it's impacting legal practice. And I'd like to if you wouldn't mind spending a little time talking about other ways that artificial intelligence can come into legal practice, and things that are coming to mind are like e-discovery, timekeeping, things that are really about efficiencies that aren't about eroding what kind of lawyers do from an intellectual capital perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The thing that so Lofty works with, give or take 100 partner firms around the country. And what you're seeing in the space right now is it getting hyper competitive, right? For a variety of reasons. And I think you're seeing that across practice areas, that it's becoming very competitive. And I think almost all businesses, lawyers in particular, automatically gravitate to the way that you increase profit is by increasing revenue. Well, there's another way to do it, right? You can reduce your expenses. And I think that that's the power of AI, right? AI can allow you to operate more efficiently and increase your bottom line by finding inefficiencies in your expense stack and using it to reduce those. And so I think that right now, in my opinion, that is that's the best use of AI, right? I think that there's like easy wins to use AI to do things more efficiently. And I don't think it necessarily needs to mean like we're firing people, right? I think that there are, you could look at it two ways, right? And I know at Lofty, the way that I'm looking at it is like, it's not about reducing your overhead. It's about getting more yield from each piece of your overhead, right? So if I have an intake specialist that can handle 15 intakes in a day, maybe with AI, we can get that to 30. Now, that will certainly reduce the rate at which we hire people, right? But hiring is another huge cost for firms, right? Not just the actual salary that you're paying somebody, but people forget the cost of how long it takes to train them, right? And get them efficient. And so I think that's a very big use case for AI right now.
Well, with that, I think we're going to pretty much call it here. But I wanted to thank you so much for your time, Todd. We really appreciate you coming out and repping WashU Law and technology and legal as much as you are.
Cool. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.